Hi there, this is Elise Bennin, your marketing mentor. And this is the podcast for you if and only if you are ready to leave the feast or famine syndrome behind, and I mean for good. If you sound like a robot when you give your elevator pitch, this episode is for you. I'm talking to Gigi Rosenberg, a public speaking coach, about how to scruff up your content. And that includes your elevator pitch and your LinkedIn profile and your website and much more. In this age of AI, I believe perfectionism is more and more associated with being robotic, which means that being human is necessarily imperfect and therefore real. So accepting our imperfections, maybe even indulging them, is one simple way to avoid being confused with AI. But you do have to relax about it. Want to know how? Listen and learn. All right, welcome Gigi to the podcast.
I'm thrilled to be here, Elise.
Thank you. Me too. Why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm Gigi Rosenberg, and I'm a public speaking coach. I live in Portland, Oregon, but I work with clients all over the world. It's mostly C-suite people and nonprofit leaders, and I work with people to help them speak with more authority, more confidence, presence, calm, and warmth.
What about perfection? What do you think about perfection?
Well, it's interesting about perfection because, if something is too perfect, whether it's a speech or even an elevator speech or an introduction, it can sometimes feel unreal. So there are times when I'm working with somebody, like just the other day, I was working with somebody on their introduction, and we spent a long time finding the right words. And then I said, okay, now what you have to do is your introduction is now like a pair of brand new white sneakers. You got to go out to the driveway and take them and scuff them up. So what I meant by that was we had to take what was these perfect sentences and really turn it into another language, which is the spoken language. Because sometimes if you read, if you recite perfect sentences when you're introducing yourself, it just doesn't feel real. It sounds like you're reading from your own website or something. So I guess that's one little take on perfection.
Yeah. And actually, I'm going to take it in the direction that I was not intending, because I love this phrase, how to scuff up your content. When I heard you say it the first time, I was like, we need to create some content about that. And so it might be very meta what we create and talk about, because we just might scuff up this content and we'll figure out what that means. And it's not going to be perfect because I've got a dog and you never know what she's going to do, or the doorbell's going to ring, or the phone's going to ring, or something's going to happen. And I kind of like that about this podcast. And I don't know, just even the way I work is not wanting it to be perfect. I don't think I've ever actually been a perfectionist. But all of that said, what your response made me think about is something that I said very recently, kind of for the very first time in my 36 years of working with people on, among other things, their elevator speeches or elevator pitches, which is how they answer the question, what do you do? And I was basically saying the thing you come up with for your elevator pitch is the thing that, yes, you will put on your website or in your email newsletter, in the About section, or on your LinkedIn profile, but it's definitely not the way you actually answer the question in real life when someone says, what do you do? So I love that you're talking about that too with your coaching clients.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you don't want to sound like you're reading your marketing materials. You want to just sound like you're having a beer with somebody and they've just said, what do you do? And you're just talking to them in a conversational way, both what you say, but also how you say it. So there might be some pauses in there. I don't teach people to add ums because they certainly don't. But if it comes out with short sentences, or it's funny, if you looked at the transcript of how people speak, it's so ungrammatical, and we start and we stop and we loop around and we come back. So that would not work in like a book where it's published and it's there's sort of a level of literary perfection, but it definitely works with spoken language.
It's so interesting. I want to maybe talk a little bit, kind of stay on this. I'm just listening to myself talk and not finish any of my sentences, actually, as an
Exactly.
example of this lack of perfectionism. But I want to talk about the difference between what I say and maybe even what you say when you give your elevator speech versus what is on my LinkedIn profile or on my website, because they're vastly different. And kind of one of the questions I want to talk about is like, how different should these be, and how should someone think about the difference between the two? So, for example, I will tell you that whenever someone asks me what I do, what I say is I teach creative professionals how to market their services. And then I stop talking and I wait to see how someone responds. But on my website, on my LinkedIn profile, in other places, I will often say, I teach creative professionals how to get better clients with bigger budgets. Or I say, yeah, no, that's usually what I say. Actually, I focus on the result, the effect. And I'm not exactly even sure why I make that distinction. I just know that when I'm talking to someone, the very first thing I say, I want it to be as clear as possible. And I don't want their eyes glazing over, and I don't want them wondering what I mean. So that's why I keep it plain and simple. I teach creative professionals how to market their services. And then that can start a conversation where eventually I'm going to say something about getting better clients with bigger budgets. But I don't know. How do you hear that, Gigi, and maybe even use yourself as an example as well?
So if I hear in a conversation market their services, it sounds like it's not such beautiful words, but if I hear in a conversation better clients and bigger budgets, it's such, there's the alliteration, and it sounds, it's great marketing copy, which I'm expecting to read on a website. But if you said it the first thing, I'd go, wow, they're so salesy, or
Mm.
it's too perfect. The other thing you mentioned that I think is so important is you have that first sentence when you're talking to somebody, which includes that not stunning phrase, but a perfectly fine phrase, market their services. But you are then waiting and looking and listening to see what their reaction is, to then decide, do I go further? So sometimes I say with a spoken, let's say, introduction, it's almost like you're putting out the little cheese cubes and you're waiting. Are they going to eat one? Oh, good. Okay, they're coming a little closer now. Now I'm going to put out the next one. And the next one is going to be better clients with bigger budgets. But I would not, that's not the cheese cube to put out first. It's too well written, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's why I wanted to have this conversation about scuffing up your content, because I do think often what we write is too well written. And this
Hmm.
all, especially in what is this rising age of AI. But I
Hmm.
also love the cheese cube metaphor. And I know you've got some content that you've created over the years about cheese cubes. So I don't know, maybe tell us a little bit about cheese cubes if it's appropriate.
Well, I don't know if there's more to say about cheese cubes, but really, the thing is, when you're speaking, it's funny how we learn this. I mean, I grew up in a family where if you weren't interesting, people were going to stop listening.
Mm.
And I think most people are like that. But so you learn quickly, okay, if I want to keep people's attention, and whether this is, I want mom to stop me and buy an ice cream or whatever, I better craft my content so that people keep listening. So we learn early. I mean, some of us do, because there's some people who really are just the innately boring speakers, but we don't have to talk about them right now. But we learn quickly how to hook our audience, whoever that is. So I just lost my train of thought. What I was going to say about that. So that's what I mean about the cheese cubes. What's going to keep you engaged? What's going to keep you listening? What's going to keep you coming towards me? And I'm watching, I'm listening, I'm seeing, I'm wondering, is that is this person losing interest? Are they gaining interest, etc. So that's what I love about speaking, is that it's such an alive, it's something we do. It's time based. It unfolds with time. And part of what we're doing is watching and listening to our audience to see what's landing.
And bringing them along with us. And here's one of the meta aspects of this, because you lost your train of thought for a moment. You recovered beautifully. You said, here's what's happening. And I'm thinking, it's fine with me if you lose your train of thought. And that's imperfect and real. And it happens to all of us, especially as we get older. But, would you want that to be something we edit out, for example?
Well, it's such a great example of what to do when there's a mishap.
Mhm.
And a mishap can be, I lost my place. You're giving a talk and you lose your place or you lose your train of thought. And it's so funny. What most people try to do is they try to cover their tracks. They don't want anyone to notice, but that's impossible.
Mm-hmm.
Because in covering your tracks, if you lose your train of thought or lose your place, you can tend to go to doing a lot of umming as your mind is scrambling for what do I
Mm-hmm.
say? So it's like the ball has already dropped. And the best thing to do is to let the audience know what's happening. So, and then this recover, like let them in and recover with them. So,
Yeah.
for example, to say, oh, I lost my place. I got to check where I am. Or I said, oh, I lost my train of thought. And then and that relaxed me enough that I could think, what was I talking about? And then I remembered the cheese cubes. I thought, oh, yeah, that's the point I was trying to make.
Mm-hmm.
So we tend to want to, which makes sense, but it's all that thing about we want to seem perfect. So, oops, we made a little mistake. Then we cover our tracks, but we really can't because everyone's seen the ball drop already. So it really is a great way to stay connected to your audience, especially when you have the impulse to hide something, because the hiding is really impossible.
And I don't know if this is connected to what you're saying right now, but where my mind is going is to this idea of not knowing what's going to happen next, not knowing what I'm going to say next, but this and connecting that somehow to the idea of mishaps and mistakes, which we can't hide, we can't cover up, and most people are not really paying that close attention anyway in the first place. So they may not have noticed. But I was just thinking as you were talking, like how much courage do you have to have? How much trust in yourself do you need to have? What is it that we can do or have that allows us to maybe just relax and be who we are, whether we're talking to a big group of thousands of people or even in a meeting with one or two other people, right? When you talk about speaking, you're not just talking about people giving keynotes, you're talking about all the different types of situations where you need to speak up.
So, you said the word relax, and I think that's the key. And I think part of being a better speaker is to learn what you need to relax. And that's different things for different people. So when I teach, I always tell the group, I want you to leave today with like this huge bag of tips and techniques so that you have a lot to choose from, because you change and need other things, or things that were working once stop working, et cetera, or in different situations, you need different things. So it's like, what do you need to be your most relaxed self? And some people might need to prepare a lot, but in a way where they've got, oh, I don't know, for lack of a better word, just guidelines. They know whatever that means for you. I knew somebody once who could really just show up and talk off the top of her head, and it always came out so great.
Mm,
And I thought, if I didn't prepare at all, I would just be so nervous that I'd feel I wouldn't be able to think, you know. So it's figuring out what do you need to be in that state, you know, really where your nervous system is in its most relaxed state. So you're the most resourceful. And I think for everybody, that's a little bit different because if you over prepare, that can also really screw you up too, because then you're not ready at all for improv. But, you know, the other huge thing it takes is just a lot of road time. And that's part of being relaxed, a lot of experience being up there, whatever up there means, whether it's leading a meeting or up on a big stage. You need to get used to it, whatever that is. And that, you know, that's a life's work.
that is for sure because I used to prepare a lot for almost everything, but especially for talks that I would give. And actually, in the last couple of years, as I've been running the Simplest Marketing Plan, which has a monthly office hours, office party, I like to call it, where I give a half-hour presentation, I'm finding that it's not that I don't prepare, it's just that I'm talking about things that I know really well and I talk about all day long. And so I know that whatever I'm going to say is going to be fine. It'll be good enough. And sometimes it'll be really good and I'll surprise myself, but I'm not actually aiming for, I hope it's really good. What I'm aiming for is, I hope I'm clear. I really just want to be clear. And so the preparation that I will sometimes do is just talk things through out loud. I guess one might call that rehearsing. But what I notice about this, I'd be curious what you think about this. I notice that what's helpful about, let's say, just talking through 10 minutes of talking points that I have written out is it will show me what I shouldn't say. And that gives me an opportunity to do it better and better the next time and the next time, and then whatever the real time is. But that's the part that's kind of new and surprising to me lately is when I rehearse, it's to get rid of all the things that probably don't make sense or aren't really clear or aren't really relevant or just are politically incorrect because I can be politically incorrect.
Well, you know, the thing is, Elise, you're doing a lot of rehearsing in there. And it's also on content that you really know in your bones.
Right,
And I think what happens for people who are starting out or even, you know, mid-career, let's say, or it's a new topic for them,
right.
then they need to, it's not in your bones yet. And then I think you need more to mix a bunch of metaphors here, more scaffolding when you go into whatever that's going to be. You just need more supports, whatever that is. But the talking it through that's one method of getting it in your bones because you realize then where there's some logic missing or the order it's out of order or you know it's funny I help people with what's the best way to get feedback because if somebody sits and listens to you and you want to say you know was that good or whatever you know of course everyone wants to present their thing and have the person say it was good but the truth is if somebody says it's good that gives you absolutely no information
Right.
because you're just learning about their aesthetic and you know you might look back at the video and think god they thought it was good and I thought it was awful you know but to ask somebody where was what was what's the thing you remember from what I just said and
Mm,
because you want to know did it land with them or where was it confusing because sometimes it's so clear in your mind but then someone's like I don't get it and
right.
it can feel frustrating and awful but it's good to know and I think that's what you're doing in rehearsal is figuring out what's missing what's too much you know and you know you also learn oh I'm so attached to this thing but then you realize I don't even need that thing it's not even helping my audience at all so the rehearsing is such a big important thing to do.
Yeah, agreed. All right. Now I'm looking at my notes because we haven't talked about anything I intended to talk about, and we don't have that much more time, but I do want to ask you a couple other questions. And I feel like, again, this is where it gets very meta because I did all this preparation and I'm throwing it away, essentially. And actually, just respond to that idea of doing the preparation and then throwing it away, because I think that's a really good idea. But I know some people get very, I don't know, annoyed with themselves or feel like it was wasted. And I don't feel like it was wasted at all. We can do another one later.
That's true. Yeah. It's like having the perfect date planned with somebody where, we're going to walk by the river and then we're going to go to this restaurant and then, we're going to get this ice cream at the end. And then, it's raining and 40 degrees and the restaurant's closed and,
Right.
it's too cold for ice cream. And it's funny, we do get very attached to our plans, but the truth is the thinking beforehand is part of what's getting you ready. And then, like everything or like so many things, it's an improv. What's funny about that too, I sometimes in coaching, in the last rehearsal, somebody will be so pleased with how far they've come, and I will be too. Like they really, it's the whatever they're doing is really coming together. And I'll have to say to them, you know what, now when you go out there to do it, don't try to like recreate what just happened here that was so good. Because each time you do it, it's totally new. And if you get attached to what came before, then you can't be in the moment of, whatever is going to happen with this one you're doing right now. So being able to throw things away is really I concur. It is it is a great thing and hard to simple but not easy.
Right. All right. So there's just one question, though, that I'm not going to throw away because I think it's related to what we're talking about, which is in terms of preparation and for something like this, for example, or for a talk or for a meeting that you're going to lead, or even for a meeting you're going to participate in. I was thinking about you could have talking points. You could have a manuscript or a script that you memorize. You could have bulleted points based on that script, or you could just totally improvise. So, how do you think about those different things and maybe which is best when or for whom?
So let's start with the most rigid one, which would be having a script that you memorize. For some people and for some situations, that's spot on. Like I'm thinking about a TED talk or a TEDx that needs to be memorized, but you are giving it as if it's not memorized. So that really requires a lot of acting skills to do that so that you seem like you're a trained actor. You're acting out the words as if they're just coming to you fresh in that moment. And then if we take one step back from that, there's having a script that, let's say, you're reading. And the trouble with that is that you're very distanced from your audience, but there are cases where the words need to be exactly right. And the reading is just fine for that. So a step back from that, this is my favorite one, which is having bulleted points so that you can look at the audience and be with them. But every once in a while, you glance down to see where you are. You know the script very well. You've memorized the open. And when I say by the open, I mean like first sentence, so you can be looking at the audience. You've memorized the last sentence, so you can be looking at the audience. That one I love because I feel like you've got the security of the notes, but they're just a support. And then stepping back from that would be, let's just say it would be having maybe a vague idea of what you're going to say and improvising. I think that works for some people, and it's a little bit who just happen to be good at that. But when I say good at that, I mean relaxed enough and have the gift of gab, and are people that are very good in the moment doing a lot of work. But I think those people are fairly rare. And I think what can happen with complete improvisation with just a couple of little points is you might need to do a lot of talking to figure out what the heck you're saying.
Mm.
And often that isn't that interesting. You know, So it just depends. You need to know yourself, know the situation, know how relaxed or nervous you're going to be. If I'm nervous, I have nothing to say. I'm just completely silent. So I know that if it's going to be a high stakes thing, I'm going to have to be ready and have my supports with me, whatever those are. So those are my thinking. But again, if you really know the topic and you talk about it every day, and it's sort of like you've already gotten rid of the fat, it's already kind of cooked already, then I think the riffing is fine. So it really, really depends.
And let's talk about your podcast briefly, because you have a podcast also. And I'm curious, tell us a little bit about it, but also how do you prepare for that? Which of these situations or ways of preparing do you prefer to use for your podcast?
So the podcast is Gigi Presents. And the idea behind it is that I'm interviewing great speakers really to find out how they do it. Because very few people, well, none of us are born great speakers. We always have to learn that. So I want to know. And so I'll pick somebody who does something really well, whether that's joy they bring to the stage or storytelling skills or just how relaxed they seem up there or whatever it is. So I'll interview them. And then I also interview people who are specialists in one thing, whether that's voice or stage presence or all the other things that go into speaking. So when I prepare, I really feel like I'm having this person over to dinner. And
Mhm.
so I have really dug into their background enough. So I won't ask questions that like anybody could read on their website. I want them to feel really well taken care of. So they relax. So they'll give me a better interview. And I will write my intro, but again, for me, I might write it out, but then translate it to bullet points, and I've got it in front of me. And then I will write my outro because I want to make sure I get that correct. And I will have a list of questions because, I don't want to rely completely on everything I'm thinking in the moment. And even though, it can be edited, if I take a long pause, it can be edited later. But I want them to feel like I'm really, really ready and myself to feel that way. So it might be that I'll do a little less, but I can't imagine that I would because I do want to really dig in and have the questions. And I don't want to forget things in the moment that I really want to ask them about. So I guess that's a lot of preparation when you think about it. But for me, I can't think of any other way, shorter way to do it. And if it's scheduled for the afternoon, it's kind of on my mind all day, and I'm humming and stretching and trying to get in the zone. So it's a lot of preparation, but I just can't. I just can't think of any quicker way to do it. It's just what I need to feel ready.
Oh my God, it's so the opposite of what I do. But before I get to that, I'm curious, do you send your questions to the guest so they
Actually,
can
no,
prepare?
no, I
How
don't.
come?
I don't want them to think about their answers at all because I want if they're relaxed, which is my whole idea of all this preparation I'm doing, I want them to feel like they're really talking, I want to say really off the cuff.
To you,
And
basically.
I don't want it to feel prepared. And also I'm talking to people who talk about this stuff all the time.
Right.
And if but I'll say to them, it's going to be an interview about such and such, and there's no need for you to prepare. These are people who've written books on whatever topic we're talking about. So I know they're going to be able to talk about it on the fly.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I maybe because I've been doing this podcast for, I don't know, 12 or 13 years, and I'm talking to people who usually I know or know well or have a really clear idea of why I wanted to have a conversation with them. I make a list of questions, I send it to them, and then we get on the call. And the extent of my preparation.
That's amazing.
So I am totally riffing and I am totally just, if I had a question, actually I do. We're going to come back to my last question, which I didn't want to forget to ask you, but, and sometimes I'll make a note like, oh yeah, let me come back to that. But I really am going only with what's in my head. And that, what I love about that, truthfully, is because it means I have to listen perfectly as I possibly can, not just to what you're saying, but to also what I'm thinking as you're talking. And that is one of my favorite experiences in life,
That's
actually.
cool. Very cool.
All right. So here's the last question, and then I'll ask you to tell people where they can find you. But I want to bring it back around to the elevator speech and the way we introduce ourselves because I've seen you introduce yourself many times, and I noticed that you always say something slightly different and you look up. Are you
Mm.
aware of looking up as you are talking? And is that a strategy?
Well, I don't know if it's a strategy, but I long ago I studied NLP, which stands for neuro linguistic programming, and I learned that when people look up, they're usually like imagining the words, like seeing the words written out. So I think it's what I do, and and human and other humans do when they are thinking or actually look like I don't have a photographic memory, but that's part of how I remember things it's almost like how I spell. I see the
Mm.
word written out and then I just say, oh, it's, CH, and I'm just almost reading off an image in my mind. So that's what I'm doing. I mean, I don't love the looking up.
I love it.
That's hilarious. But I also know that for me, I would, unless it's a super high stakes thing, unless if I'm being interviewed by, I don't know, 60 Minutes, if that show is even still on or whatever. But maybe I would memorize. I want it to be different each time. I want to, when I introduce myself, to be thinking about, oh, who have I just worked with, or what did we work on? Because it's what I do is it's always evolving. I hopefully it's always getting better, and so I want it to stay fresh, which is why I do it a little differently each time.
And what I see in your looking up is that you're thinking,
Yeah, I'm thinking. Yeah, exactly.
right? That's what you said, even. And when
Right.
I see that someone is thinking, taking the time for themselves, giving themselves the time to think instead of feeling pressure to, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, I got to answer, or I don't want to make this person wait. Like, no, there's a lot of self respect, I think, in the pause. I know you've talked a lot about pausing, right? In just taking a pause and not rushing. And I don't know, I feel like it's very in the moment.
It's funny. It's in a way, it's something you can do if you don't want it to seem perfect. And when you're talking to somebody, introducing yourself, you definitely don't want it to come out like you're, an elevator pitch robot,
Mhm. Mhm.
And so it definitely, I mean, it's the first sign of, oh, she's not a robot. She's looking up. She's thinking. And yeah, that's probably yeah, I guess that is one thing you could do. Although I don't think it's a strategy to like, well, I'll look up now, so it looks
Right.
like I'm thinking.
You
But
can't
it
plan
does
it.
make it, yeah, you can't plan it. It does make it seem imperfect, which in that situation is absolutely spot on.
Well, I am so glad you're not a robot, Gigi, and I appreciate you coming on the podcast and sharing your expertise and your improvisation and your thinking, and tell the people where they can find more from you and what specifically they can find.
So you can go to my website, which is gigirosenberg.com. And I have got a lot of little videos there. I have some great resources that you can download, a book about a workbook about elevator speeches and some other great little cheat sheets. And you can also find a link to the podcast there. So it's gigirosenberg.com. And I would love to have you come over and have a visit.
And don't you also have a newsletter that people can sign up for?
And I do have a newsletter. It comes out about once a month, and each month I feature one tip. So it's not overwhelming, but the idea is it's one tip that you can start using that day and all around public speaking, and that you can sign up for. That's actually the sign up is at the bottom of every page.
Awesome. All right. Thank you again, Gigi.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. This was fun. I love how meta that conversation was, don't you? But it's not like AI is bad. In fact, I've been experimenting with using AI to help creative professionals find clients, and it's working. So if you want my help finding actual clients using AI, check out my new one-on-one AI client finding coaching calls. Or you can just sign up for my quick tips. All of that can be found at marketing-mentor.com. And once you're on the site, you'll see lots more resources, including my simplest marketing plan. So enjoy, and I'll see you next time.